Welcome to this episode of the Building Texas Show. I'm excited to talk to a founder today that is working on a really neat solution that I just didn't know was part of the world. And about a year ago, Whit Runion came to us and talked to us about Fuel Perfect and fuel polishing. So I'm excited to introduce fuel polishing to our audience. And Whit, thank you for joining me on the last day of 2025.
I know. Feel like I get to close it out with a bang. This is great. Uh, and thank you for, you inviting me on the show with Building Texas Show. This is a really good, great opportunity. And I love what you do.
I appreciate that. And our goal is to help people discover the future of Texas. One of the things that you and I've connected on is the infrastructure work that you do, because what you do is important as we go into winter storm season, as we go into regular maintenance on generators. When you came to us a year ago, I was encouraged and excited about what you're doing. I just want to ask, how did you get into this business? How did you find fuel polishing?
So I was the facility superintendent for a critical facility for almost a decade. And the C-suite had a third party come in and do a facility audit. And we were showing him all of our documentation, walking him around the facility, doing this and that. And we had two large generators with 10,000 gallons of fuel on each generator. And the guy goes, "When's the last time you polished the fuel?" And I said, "I don't know what you're talking about." And so he explained it to me, and I thought it made perfect sense. So I started doing some research on it. And then I tried to find someone that could do the work in the San Antonio area, and I couldn't find anyone. And I realized this was just an untapped market and a need that honestly, a lot of people don't even know it's a need. And so we've spent a lot of time and during startup doing education and awareness and just bringing this whole process of fuel polishing that a lot of people have never heard of into the maintenance cycle of your generators.
So when you talk about fuel polishing, you're not going in there and scrubbing it clean, um, but I think essentially that is what you're doing. What is fuel polishing?
So polishing is it's a 4-step process. We use a series of filters. We use both, sock filters and cartridge filters. We use centrifugal force that pulls heavier particles out of the fuel, and we use a magnet. And that magnet kind of restores the energy potential. It catches any ferrous metals. So essentially, what we're doing is we suck the fuel out, we run it through this system of filters and conditioners, and then put the fuel right back. It's kind of most likened to dialysis, which is a process that most people understand. It's dialysis for your fuel, essentially.
And your fuel being somebody that has a building, that has a generator, has critical infrastructure need, but they have 10,000 gallon tanks sitting there, and fuel has a life cycle.
It does. Diesel fuel, I think a lot of people know that unleaded will spoil and go bad over time. Diesel fuel did not have that problem for a long time. And then in 2014, the EPA started mandating ultra low sulfur diesel. The problem was the sulfur was a stability and an antimicrobial. And so once they removed the sulfur from the diesel, it took a little while, but people started realizing my fuel doesn't last as long as it used to. What's going on here? And then that's when this fuel polishing idea really started taking off and becoming much more necessary because all the major fuel manufacturers, you can find it on their websites, they claim that their diesel fuel has a shelf life of 12 months now. So after that, you need to do annual fuel polishing. So, yeah.
Well, and it's similar to the annual maintenance you do on the generator, or you should be doing on your generator, where you have a service technician. If you're under warranty, you have a service tech comes out and services it. And I imagine they look at the fuel when they do that inspection. Is that true?
So most good generator maintenance contract will be quarterly maintenance, and they'll do an annual like full workover and a load bank test. And often they will take a fuel sample. Uh, Sometimes they have it tested. A lot of times they take that fuel sample, not necessarily for the customer, but for themselves, from the standpoint that if you have a generator failure, and you say, "Hey, Mr. Service Company, we had a failure," and they can say, "Well, actually, our service was good. Your fuel was bad. Here's the report." So, and a lot of these maintenance contracts, they take care of, you know, oil, belts, hoses, coolant. Very, very rarely does it tend to the fuel itself, and that's essentially one third of what it takes to make that engine run.
Well, I'm curious about this topic because it's an infrastructure topic.
Yes.
Facilities that you're talking about are hospitals, are nursing homes, senior living centers, but big critical public buildings that require backup generation because of the winter storm that we had in 2021 or
Yes.
because of any number of things that could go wrong, and they have critical processes that can't lose power. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. There's, hospitals, anything that has assisted living, data centers are huge. Um, Public utilities, saws, water and electricity, cell towers. Most cell towers have a backup generator just to maintain communications. So and even just a high rise office building will typically have at least a small generator to run their emergency systems like elevator lighting, fire suppression, things like that still need power. And so a lot of times there's so many generators out there that I can't even count it. Yeah.
well, and with the change in 2014, I imagine there's still some buildings and facilities teams that are trying to catch up with something like this because I don't think that the general public would have realized that, hey, diesel has a different shelf life all of a sudden
Yes.
starting in 2014.
Yes, absolutely. And even fuel that looks good visually can still have a heavy particulate in it because these particles, we're measuring down to 4 microns. And the smallest that the human eye, if you have better eyes than me, can see is about 40 microns. Uh, and so anything over about 6 microns can damage a fuel injector over time. And if you have to replace if you have to replace a single fuel injector, then you're probably going to want to replace all the injectors. So you're looking at, 6, 8, 12 injectors at $2,000 a piece. Clean fuel is going to cost you a fraction of that. So it really, yeah, it
And
saves money over time.
and I think about the comparison that I have is boats, right? But a lot you go fill up your boat, it's gonna be the big fuel bill, and there's a good joke in there somewhere. But if you've got a 10,000 gallon tank sitting at the bottom of a hospital, you've spent, quick math, $45,000 on diesel, having it delivered and put in. How often are they replacing that, or is this the polishing is an alternative to direct replacement?
So, the generators, like hospitals, for example, they have to maintain 72 hours of backup. So if they have a 10,000-gallon tank, probably their minimum quantity is somewhere around 5,000 gallons. And so when they hit 5,000 gallons, they're going to refill it because they have to maintain 72 hours. So it's kind of like taking a jug of milk that's maybe half empty and a little questionable and just keep putting more milk on top and putting it back in the fridge, which is essentially what we're doing with our fuel. So a lot of people say, well, I keep adding more fuel. Yeah, but it's that fuel at the bottom. That's the stuff that you need to get out. You're just adding more on top and contaminating this good, new, brand new fuel.
And it is immediate failure. When you put bad fuel into an engine, you're not gonna run it rough, you're gonna run it broke.
Yeah, if your fuel has a bunch of water in it, you're going to get a lot of smoke, and that's going to start to damage internal components. Um, the quickest failure is if you have that particulate in the bottom, what's called diesel bug. It's basically dead algae, mold, fungus, because that that stuff can live in diesel fuel, which is kind of crazy, but it can. And that stuff will get sucked up through the fuel intake, and it clogs the onboard filters on the generator. And now your generator is just starved for fuel, and it shuts down.
So, in your business, how has the year been? What have you seen Texans looking towards? Are you finding facility teams that say, yes, this is a great idea and we want to take advantage of it? Or
Yes, I am. The reception has been very, very positive, very good. You know, a big push that we've been trying to do, we've been traveling up and down the 35 corridor a lot. We've been from Dallas to Corpus down to the valley. Um, and, one of the big things is we're talking to the facility department and the engineering departments, and those departments do not make any money for a company. They only spend money. And so if it's not on their budget as a line item, it doesn't happen this year. So we've spent a whole lot of time trying to get fuel polishing into their budget for, upcoming years. So this year was surprisingly good for us. I was very pleased. Next year, I think it's going to just double. It's going to be great.
well, we've always talked about the education opportunity for facilities teams and then for the risk managers that aren't necessarily in facilities, but do often have budget movement for them to say, hey, it's Winter Storm Uri, middle of February, and we lose our generator. The cost of that is significantly higher
Oh, yes.
than budgeting for fuel polishing, which I help me understand. You do that at a significant discount to full replacement
Oh, yes.
of
So let's
fuel.
say you have bad fuel and you don't know about fuel polishing. So you're going to pump out the old fuel, and that's going to cost you about $1 or $2 a gallon. And then you're going to buy new fuel at about $4 a gallon. So you're looking, a 10,000 gallon tank, you're looking 60 grand. Whereas I can come in and polish it for around $1 a gallon. So it's a fraction of replacement cost.
And downtime,
And
taking it
exactly.
out
The
taking it
thing
out
with
and putting it back in, when you're talking about 10,000 gallons, that's a day's work for a lot of people.
That's true, and it's very risky because you have a window of time where you do not have backup power. I don't care how sunny it is and it is outside, you could lose power at any moment.
Power is a major concern for Texans after what we learned about the grid in Winter Storm. I keep going back to Winter Storm Uri, but that was a place where policy got put in place. All of the electric providers started putting together critical infrastructure lists and making sure everyone has the right backup and trying to go through that educational rhythm of helping the facilities managers at a small rural nursing home understand, yes, you have the generator. It needs to be tested monthly. It needs to be maintained quarterly. And you need to understand what it's backing up. One of the most unfortunate stories I heard is that during Winter Storm Uri was a facility that had a backup generator, but it was hooked to everything except the heat. And and so it wasn't meeting the need or meeting the original design. And I've seen more than one of those where the facilities teams just didn't know. And these exercises in education are really an opportunity for business owners, building owners, people that are stakeholders, not just facilities, to understand that there's a lot of work that goes into the preparedness of emergency response.
There's a lot of old generators that the new facility guy inherited from the old facility guy, and it may not have been maintained well, and those things are usually kinda stuck back by the dumpsters, they're a little out of sight, out of mind. And they get forgotten. And then when you have a situation like Winter Storm Uri, you realize real quick how critical that generator is. That's been honestly the winter storm was tragic. It was a mess, but it definitely brought a lot of awareness to the backup power issues that are going on. And something else that we're realizing over the last year is brand new generators and fuel cells need to be polished as well, because we've gone to a couple of facilities where they've got a couple of old generators and they put in a couple of new ones, and they bring us in to work on the old generators, fuel. And I said, well, let me just test the new one. And sometimes it's even worse because these big fuel cells, they get built, in a factory with lots of dust and welding slag and all kinds of stuff. And then they get put on a truck and driven across 4 states and 3 rainstorms. Maybe one of the caps is off. And a lot of times I've seen them set these generator tanks in place put the generator, pipe it all in, hook it all up, fill it, and they've run the generator for the first time and just suck all that water and all that debris up into the engine on the first run of a brand new generator. And I just, boy, that's rough on a first time startup
On a very expensive piece of equipment.
on a very expensive piece of equipment. Yeah.
A lot of those engines are made here in San Antonio in the region and in Seguin, Texas, at Caterpillar facility there. We see a lot of those engines out on the road, and I think it's a great industry for Texas. But then it's a good reminder that we are seeing more strain on our grid. We're seeing more people put individual backup systems in their homes,
Hmm.
and I don't want to miss the opportunity that this is something it's different than the commercial need. But if you have a generator, take care of it. It when it fires, it needs to be ready to fire successfully, and that does require the testing and the maintenance. You've mentioned data centers, and it's a big conversation in Texas. As we've talked to mayors across Texas, they've all talked about data centers coming to their region and how they're addressing power requirements. But what are you seeing in the data center world?
Well, for every watt of power they need to run these AI platforms, they have to back up each one of those watts with some sort of backup power. And diesel generation is really the most common and affordable right now. But, whereas we used to see data centers that had two or three, generators, the now, I mean, got a call from a very large unit up in Austin that had 24 generators with 10,000 gallons each. That's a quarter million gallons of fuel on hand at any given time. And that's the kind of power it takes to run the AI. And so they got to back up that power. So we're seeing an explosion in just very large, high capacity generators going on. The power companies, are doing what they can. And, for the most part, they're doing a good job of providing that power. But with the talk of nuclear data centers, I had a conversation with someone that's familiar with that. I said, what's going to be the need for, backup power? They said, oh, they're still going to back that up with diesel generators because there's a 30-day maintenance cycle on these reactors every year. So 30 days a year, they're going to run strictly on generator power.
That's really interesting to hear. I'm also seeing microgrids go into development, and
Hmm.
they're doing something similar where they're producing their own power plant essentially, and diesel's often used. When you go to a site, you have a specialized truck that
Yes.
can do this work. And when I think about 24 generators and how much volume that would be, help me understand. I believe your truck pulls it out, takes it through everything you described earlier with the filters and centrifugal force, and then it pumps it back in just like a, di- a dialysis machine on the back of your truck.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's pretty much what it is. There's really no fuel loss or waste. There's, a little bit of residual fuel in the canisters and in the hose, but it's negligible. So we never leave site with anyone's fuel. We don't store it on the truck. It just circulates through the truck and back into the tanks. And we can do that at, up to about 90 gallons a minute. So we can be pretty efficient. That's, a gallon and a half per second. That's
That's a lot of fuel moving through very
yeah.
quickly. Well, it's been a pleasure to sit down and better understand your business and why this is an important piece of our infrastructure conversation, especially as we talk to the mayors and cities across Texas.
Yeah.
And it'll be fun to introduce people to the idea of fuel polishing and that Fuel Perfect is a great solution for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just an all around good, clean, affordable solution. And it's, I say fuel is very expensive to purchase, but it's pretty cheap to maintain. And it's a green process. We're not disposing of a bunch of hazmated old fuel. It's just checks all the boxes, in my opinion, which is why I'm so excited to be doing this. And it's just a good service that needs to happen.
Where can people find more information about you, the company, and how to work with you in 2026?
Sure. So we do have a website, www.fuelperfect.com. If you just Google Fuel Perfect. We pop right up. We're based in kind of northern San Antonio. And welcome to come by the office, give me a call. Yeah. And then if any facility, if anyone's watching this that wants to learn more, we will often do lunch and learns. The engineering departments, facility departments usually have regularly scheduled meetings. We'll come in and do a, 20-minute explanation just so everyone knows how it works and get a free lunch.
Well, thank you so much for spending the time with us today, teaching us all about diesel fuel and the changes that we've seen in the last 10 to 15 years and why it matters to us as we go into really, it's hard to say the winter season when it's 80 degrees outside, but the winter season that could show up in February in Texas like it does.
I know I get to wear this vest like 4 days a year. So, well, yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate you having us on and the time and the exposure. It's
Well, fantastic. We'll look forward to seeing you through 2026 and continuing to watch Feel Perfect success as you go through the year.
Yeah, and I'll continue to watch Building Texas show success. Like and subscribe.
There you go. Thank you for joining us at the Building Texas Show. We're excited to share stories from across the state, covering the future of work and what Texas is going to look like over the next 50 years. Please like and subscribe on YouTube